All right, so today we're gonna we're diving into something that I think we all do pretty much every day,
Yeah.
and that's ordering food at a restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
We all have to eat,
It's true.
and uh, and so you shared a really typical ordering conversation
Yeah.
that we're gonna kind of like try to unpack and see what surprising insights might be hidden in that kind of everyday
Wow.
exchange.
Okay. Yeah.
It might seem simple on the surface, but
Right. It does seem like something we do all the time, but I bet you there's more to it.
yeah, let's see what we can unpack.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's funny because when you think about it, this really basic interaction is really like this miniature social exchange. We've
Yeah.
got all these kind of like unspoken rules and dynamics
Yeah.
and what's really fascinating to me is how the subtle choices of language that both the customer and the server are making can reveal those underlying dynamics.
Yeah. Okay, let's start with the customer. What can the way someone orders tell us? For instance, just the difference between saying, I want the burger versus, could I get the burger, please?
Exactly right. So
Yeah.
just that little difference right there,
Yes.
the directness of I want
Yeah.
can signal a more assertive communication style.
Yeah.
Someone who's comfortable making demands or,
Yeah.
stating their needs really upfront and directly.
Right.
Whereas, the more hesitant phrasing of could I get, you know, often indicates a greater emphasis on politeness or deference.
Right.
Maybe a little bit more cautiousness
Yeah.
in how they're approaching the interaction.
And you might even notice this tendency in other areas of their communication too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think this kind of like micro interaction is a really good window into someone's broader communication style.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Are they very direct? Are they a little bit more hesitant?
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point.
Okay, so we've talked about the customer. What about the server side? They're not just taking the order, they're also representing the restaurant in a way.
Precisely. And that's a really important part of it too.
Right.
Because the server is kind of like the face of the restaurant to that customer.
Right.
So, if you have a server who's just really efficient,
Mm-hmm.
takes the order, gets things done quickly,
Yeah.
that kind of prioritizes speed and accuracy. And that might be the kind of like,
Yeah.
restaurant experience that place is going for.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you might have a server who's really trying to, offer recommendations or engage in a little bit of small talk.
Right.
And they might be contributing to a very different kind of a dining experience, right?
Right.
One that's more focused on hospitality and kind of like building rapport with the customer.
Yeah, like how friendly they are.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not just what they say, it's
Yes.
also how they say it, right?
Yeah.
Like, do they make eye contact? Is their tone of voice warm and welcoming, or is it a little bit more transactional?
Right.
So all those things contribute.
So this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
What if a customer asks a lot of questions about, ingredients or preparation?
Mm-hmm.
What might that indicate beyond just wanting to know what they're eating?
That's a great question. And I think it really gets at this idea of information control, right?
Okay.
So is the customer asking a lot of questions because they're seeking reassurance? Maybe they have dietary restrictions or allergies or, they're just really particular about what they eat.
Yeah.
And so they want to make sure that they're getting exactly what they want.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, maybe they're signaling a higher level of engagement with the food and the dining experience itself. They're really interested in where the ingredients come from or how the dish is prepared.
Yeah.
And they're kind of, using those questions as a way to kind of like delve deeper into that.
Okay, so it's almost like this brief exchange is a snapshot of kind of like broader power dynamics that are at play.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Like the customer has the purchasing power, but the server has the gatekeeper role.
Exactly. The server is the one who can ultimately,
Right.
bring them the food or not. So there's this interesting kind of like negotiation that's happening.
Right.
And what's really fascinating to me is how those roles are negotiated through language. A really demanding order versus a more collaborative approach can shift that dynamic in subtle ways.
Right.
And think about how the server might respond differently to each of those approaches.
Yeah.
If someone's being really demanding, they might kind of like, put up a little bit more of a wall.
Right.
Whereas if someone's being really collaborative, they might be more willing to kind of like,
Right.
share information or go the extra mile.
Yeah. So even something as simple as asking, what are the specials?
Mm-hmm.
opens up a different kind of interaction than just ordering directly from the menu.
Totally. Yeah. You're inviting the server to take on a more active role, right?
Right.
Like showcase what the restaurant is really proud of,
Yeah.
what they want to highlight. And the customer in turn is signaling that they're open to suggestion, that they're willing to be guided a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, so what does this all mean for you, the listener?
Right.
Why should we pay attention to these kind of tiny details in a restaurant order?
I think the big takeaway here is that we're communicating so much more than just the literal words that we're using, right?
Yeah.
These subtle cues, the way we phrase things, the questions we ask, our tone of voice,
Yeah.
all of that offers these little insights into our personalities, our expectations,
Yeah.
the dynamics of the interaction.
Right.
And I think it's just a really good opportunity to become more aware of our own communication style and the messages that we might be sending unintentionally.
Yeah, it makes you think.
Yeah.
So the key takeaway is that even everyday conversations like ordering food can reveal these interesting dynamics and unspoken information.
Yeah.
If we pay close attention to those little nuances.
Exactly. It's like a little microcosm of communication happening right there in front of us.
Yeah.
And it's a chance to observe it, in a very contained and familiar setting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about the last time you placed an order.
Yeah.
What subtle cues were you giving off?
Yeah.
Or were you picking up on from the server?
Right. Were you, I want, or were you, could I please get?
Yeah, exactly. And what might a deeper analysis of that interaction reveal about your communication style or the kind of experience you were seeking?
Right, exactly. It's a thought to chew on.
It is a thought to chew on.
Long after the meal is over.
Long after the meal is over.
Yeah.
Thanks for diving deep with us.
It's been fun.
Yeah, it has.
All right.
Take care.